has been a long-time supporter of the Museum of Gaming History and the club. He's a professor over at UNLV, focusing on gaming history, and what a great job to have. Paid, to do research on casinos. He's a long-time friend. And I'm not really kidding, he's not. I just met him this morning. So you should not be listening to me. You should be listening to the guy who we brought up to give you some good, valuable information. So, David.
Thank you. So, I have to ask myself, we're in Las Vegas. It's 7:53 in the morning. Why are we in a small conference room? Why? History. Because I'm thinking we all share a passion for the history of gambling. So I would, and I know that everyone here, passionate, this is something you care deeply about, this is something you've studied. And when I talk about any topic at all, and I do a lot of talking about a lot of topics, I like to come at it not from the deficit mindset, like, hey, the audience doesn't know something, I'm going to fill them up with knowledge. I like to come at it from like, hey, here's some cool stuff, let's explore it together. So I would like this to be very interactive back and forth. As you want to kind of add little bits to the puzzle, go ahead and raise your hand. It's going to be fun. All right. Cool. So I'm talking a little bit about the sands. Why the sands? It's my latest book. So that's kind of on my mind. I've got another one coming out, hopefully later this year. I can talk about that later if people are curious. But for now, let's talk about the sands. First, I would like us to talk a little bit about building the sands, then about the years that we think of. Today, people call it the Rat Pack era. I have a little bit of an issue with that, but I'll talk about that later, and some of you might too. So I prefer to call it the classic years. And then Howard Hughes and what happened after Howard Hughes. Right? And all photos you'll see are courtesy of UNLV's Special Collections and Archives. Has anyone here used that repository? Yeah, okay, so it's pretty helpful. They have a lot of pictures. So yeah, here we go. There's J.T. Friedman, and that is them building the sands. So, interesting story before the story about the sands. And it starts with a guy named Billy Wilkerson. Have folks heard of Billy Wilkerson in connection with another casino, the Flamingo? So when somebody says, well, Bugsy Siegel had the idea for the Flamingo, blah, 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 blah. We know that's not totally accurate. It was Billy Wilkerson's idea. He ran out of money because, again, hey, let's give a self-described degenerate gambler $3 million and send him to Vegas. Not the best business plan. So he ran out of money, had to go to those fellows from the East Coast. They said, meet your new partner, Ben Siegel. Siegel took it over and pushed him out. So Wilkerson got burned by that. But he was still big enough in the gambling that he wanted to come back to Vegas. So he opens up a restaurant cafe with a small casino called LaRue in December 1950. Okay, as we know that, so LaRue basically was a restaurant with a small casino. Now, why would he want to be in a building restaurants? Just to give you a little bit of backstory about Wilkerson. So he was, kind of his life story, in a very short thing, was in medical school. His father, who was also a compulsive gambler, died. So he could no longer afford medical school. So he drops out of medical schools doing various things. A friend of his wins a movie theater in a poker game and says, Billy, why don't you manage it for him? Okay. And this is in New Jersey. He then starts writing a magazine, newspaper about the film industry in New York. Then decides to move it out to LA, where it becomes the Hollywood Reporter. So by the late 30s, he is a very powerful person in Hollywood because he can control not only which stories are printed, but which stories are not printed.
Yeah.
So if a movie studio had, again, remember, this was the era of the studios, where the studio system was all powerful. So if the head of the studio doesn't want a story, he would ask, hey, Wilkerson, da, 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 da. So a very powerful guy. And he opened up a lot of nightclubs, a series of nightclubs and restaurants in LA, and they were usually successful, although he usually ran out of money. Not a great manager, great visionary, not a great manager. He partnered with a gambler from Los Angeles called Noah Hahn, H-A-A-N. He's one of these lesser known people, but an interesting story, nevertheless. So, December 1950, he builds it. February, he drops out of LaRue. Later, I think in March, so he was a self-described degenerate gambler, gambling addict. In, I think, March or April, a son is born to him. Hey, what's up? He has a son, and he gives up gambling. Now, in the 50s, he did get into, he was a rather, and please come and sit down in front. There's so many seats here. So many seats. Yeah. In the 50s, Wilkerson becomes a very committed anti-communist. And some would say maybe he was a bit too committed, naming names, stuff like that. But back to Vegas. LaRue closes in June. And I don't think I have it in here, but,
Oh, question.
yes.
Just ask a question. Is Noah Hahn any relation to Kenneth Hahn and the son who were on the LA City Council for years?
That I don't know, although it is possible knowing LA. One of the saddest classified ads I've ever seen was like July 1951 in the Review Journal. It says, for sale, walk-in refrigerator, barely used. It's such high hopes. So Matt Kupferman, all right, so who is Matt Kupferman? Matt Kupferman, in 1951, was known as a Palm Springs businessman, Palm Springs socialite. He had been a liquor distributor in New Jersey, and so when somebody's a liquor distributor in New Jersey in the 30s, 20s, 30s, well, who do we think his friends are? Probably, yeah. So, yeah. All right. So supposedly his big connection was a gentleman named Joseph Doc Stacher, or Stacher, I can never get the pronunciation right. But this was, I don't want to call him the poor man's Meyer Lansky, but he was sort of the dollar store Meyer Lansky, but he was kind of like Meyer Lansky, but was probably more talented because fewer people knew who he was. So he did a lot of the same things with financing casinos behind the scenes. So Kupferman was tied up with Stacher. So supposedly he was, who knows? Who knows? So Kupferman then starts renovating LaRue, saying, I'm going to reopen this restaurant and nightclub. Then says, I'm going to actually make this a hotel in its own right. Please come on and sit down. The tax commission in Nevada says we will not license you. Even though Kupferman has nothing on paper against him, because he's associated with Stacher, who tried to get a license in Reno a couple of years earlier and got denied, they said, we will not license you. Okay, so this is when Jake Friedman came in. So Jake Friedman, so basically the people behind LaRue, which is about to become the Sands, needed, and I don't want to say they needed a front man. They needed, or a figurehead, but they needed somebody to, almost got this wrong, shake hands and kiss babies, not shake babies and kiss babies. Shake hands and kiss babies. They needed somebody to go to work with the locals. They got Jake Friedman. So who is Jake Friedman? Jake Friedman was born in Odessa, in what is now Ukraine, was then part of the Russian Empire. He immigrated to the United States as a teen. He served in World War I. He became a gambling operator in Galveston and then in Houston. And became very politically connected. And diversified from gambling to being known as an oil man, because he owned a couple of oil wells, also was really into horses. So in the 30s, he was making the news at having a stable of horses that were competitive and were winning. And in Houston, he had the Domaine Privé, which is a private club that he had in a converted mansion. And do I have this line in here? No. I don't want that line there. So basically, I'll get to that in a minute. So we want to go to the Domain Privé, which is this converted mansion, in Houston. And let's say we get there and we don't have the right connections. We don't really look like we're Domain Privé people. The doorman will tell us, I'm sorry, Mr. Kufferman is not home. You hear the music inside and all that. Mr. Kufferman's not at home, sorry. So one of the things that Kufferman did to endear himself to people is he would give people money. Like, hey, here's money. Which was, So, and I assume that most of us have heard of the Kefauver Committee. That was in 1950-51, and it ended up causing a clampdown on local gambling all around the country. Probably, like a lot of chips, are more rare because of the Kefauver Committee. So basically, after the Kefauver, political situation was changing in Houston, and he's like, maybe I should come to Vegas. So he comes out to the LaRue, which is now known as the Sands, in August of 1952. And kind of one of the myth, thing is that Jake Friedman's shoes were filled with sand, so he said, we need to call this the Sand. Oh, you have to call it. I've seen this online. It was actually renamed before he officially came on board. But who knows, because was he there before he's officially there? We don't know. August 1952, he's on there. Okay. And there is Jake Friedman. Again, he had the cowboy hat, with a bit of a Yiddish accent. So, so he appealed to everybody. He had the Western thing, but also the whole immigrant. So, really important person besides Friedman who was involved with Sands is Jack and Trotter. So Jack and Trotter, basically this is like everybody's dream. So how many people try to break into show business and they just end up waiting tables, they never do anything. He starts out as an usher, he was a big man, so pretty much a bouncer. And eventually, so he's an usher, then a bouncer, and he works his way up to owning part of the Copacabana Club in New York City with Monty Prosser. And also, behind the scenes, Frank Costello, who is a famous, alleged mafioso. So he has these connections. And he also is very hooked in with agents all around the country and entertainers. So he is well known. I mean, to tell you how well known he is, when they did the episode, and I don't know if I talked about it in here, but when they did the episode of I Love Lucy set at the Sands, they name dropped Jack and Trotter in a way that it seems like they assumed the audience would know who it was. Oh, well, Jack and Trotter is going to It's kind of interesting. Whereas today, if they did a show in the South Point, and I'm so sorry, is the entertainment director for the South Point in this room now? Here. If and I don't know who it is, it's probably a totally awesome person who's really good at their job, but I don't think most of the 320 million Americans would know who it is. So back then, he was well enough known that people would know who he was. He was kind of famous. Okay, he was the vice president of entertainment, or the entertainment director. He's the one who named the showroom the Coca Room, which makes sense because of the Copacabana. Okay. Buildings, so Kufferman hired a guy named Wayne McAllister to build the Sands. McAllister is, some would say in the United States, he is the godfather of casino architecture, because he built Agua Caliente, which is in Tijuana, which was really a groundbreaking casino that was then closed by the Mexican government, and also the El Rancho Vegas, which was the first casino resort on what became the Las Vegas Strip. To the extent that we can say this one person was the pioneering architect in American casino design, it was Wayne McAllister. So we hired Wayne McAllister. And you had what was a very familiar design, the main building with the casino, the showroom, all that fun stuff, and then smaller rooms, 5 different 2-story rooms, and they're all named for racetracks because Friedman is so into horse racing. Okay. And it was executed in what is called a Bermuda modern style. So kind of bland, not a real overt theme. The theme just was nice hotel in the desert. All right, so the opening. So Monday, December 15th, there was a preview for locals, and they really did take care of locals. Come on in, and please, there are seats available in the front and also there. So now people have to make the calculation, do we walk to the front or climb over people? We're saying that. And both are okay, because this is, I can tell this is a really friendly crowd. we can come in, we can go out, it's cool. So it opens December 15th, they have a big opening on the 17th. The rooms, of course, they were going, and Danny Thomas was the opening entertainer, and really for the next 30 years was the face of the Sands. So even though today we think of Frank Sinatra, at the time when they had, every year when they did their anniversary, Danny Thomas is gonna MC. Frank is great and all, but if this is a big event, we need Danny. So he was there. Ray Sinatra, not supposedly a cousin of Frank Sinatra, but I've also heard not really related, was a musical director. And today, $35,000, I don't know what that would value. How much catering would that value at this hour? Maybe a couple oranges and bananas. Back then, I came the entire opening home, plus the entertainment. There was a storm the opening night, power outage. Danny Thomas then couldn't sing, so, and this tells you a lot about Vegas. Jimmy Durante steps up, does his bit. Frankie Lane does some singing. Jane Powell, Ray Anthony, the Ritz Brothers, Denise Darcell, and Eddie Jackson just jump up there and help out. And they buried a time capsule on that day, and it was either, so there's two places where the time capsule is. Either it is somewhere deep below the 8-foot concrete slab that the Venetian is on, or it's in somebody's garage somewhere. Either probably a construction or demolition person's garage somewhere. But it is not publicly, nobody publicly knows where it is, but again, it's either below the slab or in a garage. I'm hoping it's in a garage. Okay. And that was a picture of the Sands at about a little bit after opening, because they did add more. But here's the main building, the pool, that was the garden room, and here are some of them. And they just kept on adding low-rise buildings. Okay, classic years, all right, cool. Nice. Entertainment. So, when we're looking at casinos in the 50s, much like casinos today, they have pretty much the same product. Gambling is gambling, and I know the gambling conditions at South Point are much better than the gambling conditions further up the strip. Now, I imagine it's probably easier to find a 3-2 table here.
Oh, yeah.
I'm imagining the pay tables and video poker, probably better. So I know we have that exception, but in general, they're offering the same product. And back then, you didn't have 6-5 blackjack. You certainly didn't have 000 roulette, you know, and it didn't have video poker at all. So pretty much the games were all the same. So how do you differentiate? What do you do? Entertainment. So Trotter spent $250,000 in entertaining in the first 2.5 months, which was a lot of money back. Okay, so you had Danny Thomas, and listen to this lineup. Danny Thomas, Lena Horne, Edith Piaf, Billy Etzke. So that's, and it's interesting too because it shows the diversity. So Edith Piaf, not the person we would think of as a Vegas performer. And that's what I love about Vegas in the 50s. They'd have like Noel Coward, like all kinds of people you wouldn't think of as a headliner would be performing. All right. The Cobra Girls were the chorus line, big deal. So they start spending more on entertainment. Then the other casinos start spending more. But there's a little wrinkle here. If you're a performer, let's say you're a singer, and your agent is trying to get you booked into Fort Lee, New Jersey, or, you know, Chicago, Illinois, or someplace, right? And he's trying to get you more money. Yeah, he's great, he's got a record out. If it's, he just headlined the Sands in Vegas, the Cobra Room, your asking price just went up. So a lot of entertainers wanted to pay there, even when the Desert Inn started paying more people. So, like, Johnny Ray. Everybody wanted Johnny Ray. You know, do we remember Cry? Okay, so everybody was really into Johnny Ray, and rightfully so. And he's like, I want $30,000 a week. Sand says no, Desert Inn says yes. So even after the Desert Inn and other casinos were offering more than the Sands still had that marquee that people would put there. Okay. And really everything. All right. Carl Cohen, a very important figure in the history of casinos in Vegas. So he's originally from Cleveland, moved to LA. I will tell you, having interviewed a lot of people in the gaming industry, universally, people who were around before 1970 say that he was the best manager in the history of the casino business. I've heard that from Jack Binion and Steve Wynn. Like they both said this. And I asked why, and they both said pretty much he was great at table game protection and also really good at the customer management, customer relations aspect of it, which not everybody was in. And today, it's so specialized that nobody's ever going to be able to do all that stuff again, because they have specialists for all that. So he moved to Vegas in 1941 after living in LA, and he bought into the El Rancho Vegas. He became the casino manager in the El Rancho Vegas. In 1953, he leaves to join the Sands. Okay. Now, this is another thing that I've seen on the internet, people reporting this as fact, that Howard Hughes came into the El Rancho Vegas. Belvin Cattleman, the owner, said, that guy looks like a bum, he's wearing tennis shoes and he's kind of scruffy, don't serve him. And there was a physical altercation between him and Carl Cohen, after which Carl Cohen walked out. This would be pretty big news. And I went through newspapers, I went through magazines, I couldn't find a mention of it. What I did find is that shortly before Carl Cohen left El Rancho Vegas, he went down to LA and spent some time, which is where Doc Stacher's headquarters were. And according to his FBI report, he was pretty much the bag man for Doc Stacher. Coincidentally, at this time, right when Cohen joined the Sands, it was announced that the Sands now had enough money to add a new room expansion. So me connecting the dots says that Stacher bought into the Sands. Part of the agreement was that Carl Cohen was going to look after his interests there, and that's why he moved over, not because he was upset that Belvin Cattleman didn't want to listen to him about serving Howard Hughes. And it's also, Howard Hughes was such a celebrity then, it's inconceivable to me that Belvin Cattleman, who came from LA, would not recognize Howard Hughes, who was a very distinctive looking gentleman. I think we call him a very tall guy. So I don't think you would see, like throw him out, he's wearing tennis shoes. You would know that was Howard Hughes. So yeah, so that story's kind of ridiculous. But I think that kind of, and sorry, that's just why I'm skeptical about a lot of things I see floating around there. Because when you do the research, they just don't add up. You see, I'm having so much fun. Okay. All right, so. Oh yeah, so there's Cohen and then Trotter. Cohen was a big dude too. He's about 6 foot tall, and Trotter is even bigger. Both tough guys. All right, now we get to Frank Sinatra. Any questions at this point? I feel like we're talking. Yes?
Was entertainment in those days considered a loss leader? Was it expected to make money, et cetera?
Yes, absolutely a loss leader. And that's what we're going to get in Sinatra. So if we look at entertainment today, probably what determines if something is successful? So like Lady Gaga, jazz and piano, is it successful? Does it make money? Back then, that's not true. In the early years, I think there was a 2-drink minimum in the Copa. Later on, there was a cover charge, but originally there was no cover. So literally, it was the dinner theater, you order your food, and you get to see Sinatra for the price of your food, unless you're comped. So they weren't interested in selling tickets. They were interested in casino drop. And they find when Sinatra plays, the drop goes up. Other people, so like, for example, Elvis plays The Last Frontier in, I think, 1956, when he's the height of his popularity, doesn't move the needle, and isn't asked back until later on, when, of course, he's at the International. Another person I was reminded of this, for a picture I have later on, Ronald Reagan played The Last Frontier, too. So yeah, it's kind of kind of interesting. I have a picture of him later on because he has a small connection with the Saints. All right, so Frank Sinatra. So 1953, and again, we've probably all seen The Godfather, right? It's like the Johnny Fontaine character, oh, my voice is weak. That's kind of where Frank Sinatra is in 1953. Things are going badly. He's divorced Ava Gardner, she divorced him. He owes the IRS money. He has a running feud with the media, and the media hated Frank Sinatra. Absolutely hated him, and he returned the favor. Okay. So he actually assaulted a reporter, a columnist actually assaulted him. And it's kind of, so I've got a kind of a good Sinatra story, who, you know, I think we are all in love with his singing, but he was a complicated man who did not like to apologize. So Sinatra, and I think this is in the 50s around this time, Sinatra is living in Palm Springs. He's at just a house party in Palm Springs and gets into a fight with just some guy, a wealthy man from Palm Springs, and hits him. And they're like, hey, look, a couple days later, you know, the guy doesn't want to sue you, take you to court. All he, like, just apologized to him, and like, and Sinatra was totally in the wrong. Sinatra goes to his house, rings the doorbell, the guy opens the door, just stands there like, can't do it, can't do it. That's the kind of guy Sinatra was. Like, again, couldn't do it. Okay, so he was fighting for us. He had performed at the Desert Inn, which was like, okay. It was like, all right, it was okay. When he starts the Copa Room in October, From Here to Eternity has just come out. I have another little footnote. Here, he had almost, there were rumors that he wasn't going to show for the performance because he was up for the lead on The Waterfront, which went to Marlon Brando, who won an Oscar. And this is why, when they filmed Guys and Dolls, things were tense on the set between Marlon Brando and Frank Sinatra. And you could look it up on YouTube, Marlon Brando singing Luck Be a Lady. Oh, yes. Yes, and it's like, you guys had Frank Sinatra right there. You couldn't have cast this differently. So he sings Luck Be a Lady. Yeah, so Marlon Brando singing Luck Be a Lady. Also, like a little thing, if anybody's into like heavy metal, people credit Ronnie James Dio for creating the horns thing. You know, it's actually an old Italian thing against the evil eye, and Marlon Brando does it when they say snake eyes. He does that thing, so it's kind of cool. Some people say, oh, it's like some, you know, heavy metal thing. No, it actually goes back and forth. Which Ronnie James Dio, who was Dio and then also the lead singer of Black Sabbath, got it from his mother. His grandmother. All right, so Sinatra the Sands. Anyway, most headliners up to this point in Vegas, and remember, Vegas entertainment was still in the vaudeville era, where we have a comedian warms up the crowd, then we have a juggler, an animal act, roller skater something, dancing girls, a singer, then the main event. And usually the main event was like 20 or 30 minutes. So they come out there, they do the 20 or 30 minutes, and that's it. Sinatra, for the first time, said, no, I'm going to have one person open for me, and I'm going to do an hour. And it's amazing because one reviewer said, well, I guess that's okay if you want to hear Sinatra sing. But like, most people want to see like the acrobatic twirlers and stuff. And why would they want to see Sinatra performing in Vegas? So yeah, it was amazing how many people, you know, people said he's over the hill. Yeah, it was interesting. But he drew a lot of gamblers. He had also negotiated an ownership share in the Sands. It is alleged that he was actually holding those points for people who couldn't be licensed. But on paper, at least, he has a share. And he certainly acts like it's in that he owns it. And interestingly enough, he had tried to build a casino in Vegas called the Horizon in 1946. And he becomes a huge star at the Sands. Very successful. Antonio Morelli, another important name for history. Right. So he takes over for Ray Sinatra's musical director for Copa. There was a traveling review called Oh What a Night, and he was a longtime musician and conductor. And they stopped at the Last Frontier. He came back the next year to run the Copa's band. And Morelli got really involved in the community of Vegas. We started this Shirt Sleeve Symphonies program. They had concerts, they would do public concerts at what is now Cashman Field. And like literally, they would have the headliners from the Strip come in, do their show, and then take them back to their show on the Strip. Really big deal. And to this day, he has a scholarship fund in his name for students of music at UNLV. So Antonio Morelli, and again, these are not the names you'll see. I mean, you did see his name in the marquee, but you know, it's not like at the level of Sinatra, but a really important person. Okay, publicity. Al Freeman came from Philadelphia, had worked for George Evans Associates doing publicity, and he worked the Sands opening and then stayed on to run PR for the Sands. And his, basically, the Sands publicity strategy was scantily clad women, which, as a later PR director said, pretty guys don't get views, pretty girls do. So, like, hey, we're opening a new laundry room. Here's a woman in a bikini with a laundry basket. Like, that literally was, okay. Also, if you were on the radio or had a column or anything like that, you were staying at the Sands for free. Okay. If you had a radio show or a TV show, they would want you there. Okay. Meet Me in Las Vegas was a film, 1956, that basically was an hour and 30-minute commercial for the Sands, like how awesome the Sands was. Starred Dan Daly and Sid Charisse. We'll have a picture of that later. So there is Jerry Lewis and Jane Mansfield, 4th anniversary of the Sands. There's the Sands, and there's Dan Daly and Sid Charisse from Meet Me at the Sands. Okay, so the Dunes, something cool happened at the Dunes. So in 1955, 5 casinos opened in Vegas, and there's too many casinos. All the new ones go bankrupt and change owners. They all fail. Sands management takes over the Dunes. So in September, they have their big opening bash, Frank Sinatra riding a camel, which is interesting. But even that doesn't make the Dunes successful, partially because it was really clear that the Sands was the A property and the Dunes was the B property. So you've got Sinatra at the Sands, or like somebody a couple runs down at the Dunes. Where January, the casino closed, and the Sands basically said that we're not paying the lease anymore, we're done. And eventually it reopens. So Jake Friedman passes away in 1958, early in 1958. Right? And again, like his funeral is a big deal. A lot of folks go in LA, and they actually, and again, this is kind of one of those bits of history. When has gambling in Vegas stopped? You know, they did, just in the Sands, they actually stopped gambling for an hour, which is huge. Kind of by related stories. So somebody I knew was working at Harrah's Reno in, I think it was 1978, when Bill Harrah died. And like literally, he was a slot manager, so he comes in, is doing the pre-shift. They're like, oh yeah, we have, this is happening here, and this bank machine's here. And oh yeah, Bill Harrah died this afternoon. That was it. Like, no, oh yeah, he died. Didn't stop the gambling here.
When you were showing the low-rise
Yeah.
behind the Sands, what have you, I was there 40 years ago.
Huh.
And there's all kinds of stuff going on. Maybe you can tell me if this is true or not. Somebody said that the Sultan of Brunei was rented, or had the back low-rise. You ever hear anything like that?
About Adnan Khashoggi, who was the famous arms dealer, did have the, yes, it was that. And they actually renovated it. They added an entire separate phone system just for him, but he would lose like $15 million. And he actually kept that casino afloat in the late 70s. And possibly the Sultan of Brunei too, but definitely Adnan Khashoggi was, and they would close down the whole building for him, and it was worth it because he was a huge gambler.
Very strange.
Yeah, so I believe that. So Jack and Trotter becomes president. So the Rat Pack. All right, let's deal with the Rat Pack. We'll talk about the Rat Pack. So Dean Martin starts playing in '55 with Jerry Lewis, and once there is a news story that, because Dean Martin, as we might know, grew up in Steubenville, Ohio, and actually had been a dealer, so he is dealing but he's dealing all wrong, and he's basically giving money away, and Jerry's doing his shit. And it made the news. After Martin and Lewis split up in '56, Dean got custody of the Sands, the divorce. So he got it. Sammy Davis Jr. then starts in March of 1957, so at this point we have Sinatra starting in '53, Martin and Sands. Now, when they film Ocean's 11 in January of 1960, they are billed together for the first time. Al Freeman says, hey, these guys are all here anyway. If we said, like, one night only, together on stage, this will be the biggest deal. And they did promote this literally as the greatest thing since the Big Bang. Like, nothing has ever happened like this before in our lives, in human history. So it's fascinating. And because they had been kind of joining each other's shows before this. You know, even like Judy Garland played and Frank Sinatra got up and performed. So yeah, they've been doing this. Sinatra hated the Rat Pack. Sinatra hated the Rat Pack name. Originally, it was a Humphrey Bogart and Homemade Hills Rat Pack. It was applied to him by a gossip columnist. He never liked it. He wanted to call it the Klan with a C. Sammy didn't like that idea. So basically, it was kind of just like yeah. Joey Bishop probably didn't like it so much either. So basically, it was just like Frank and Friends, but they never ever. So if somebody says, "Oh, I've got a shot of the Sands Marquee in 1963 with Rat Pack," never would have happened. Kind of again, looking at the actual history, going through the archives. I don't see a lot of references to Rat Pack until the 80s.
What about Summit?
Summit was what they also called it because there was this Khrushchev-Kennedy summit that was being planned at the same time. So Summit was the official name. And yeah, they never called it the Rat Pack. And then later on, like there's a shot in the special collections and archives of the Sands Marquee saying like Dean Martin with his Italian friend. That was Frank Sinatra. So they kind of, so you'll see all that, but you'll never ever see Rat Pack. And like the people you talk to around then do not like to call it the Rat Pack. That's just it. Yeah, not only, again, and like going through the archives, when we look at the papers in 1965, they don't say the Rat Pack, but just say Frank Sinatra and his friends. That's an 80s thing. Okay. Here we have Kennedy, who visited also visited in January of 1960, where Frank Sinatra introduced him to a woman named Judith Campbell, who was also very close personal friends with Sam Giancana, allegedly the head of the Chicago mob, and became very, very deep, close personal friends, and more than friends with John F. Kennedy. So it's kind of interesting, the little strands of history connecting through the Sands. So yeah, and he actually did catch a show of Frank and everybody during that filming of Ocean's 11 in January 1960 when he was a candidate for president. Okay. Another kind of interesting thing about the Sands. So then Kennedy becomes president, and his brother, Bobby Kennedy, decides he's going to crush the mob, which didn't make him that popular. And so the FBI, the IRS, everybody is wiretapping people. They bug Doc Stature's rooms at the Beverly Wilshire. They bug Carl Cohen's Beverly Hills apartment. They're very smart people, so they don't say anything incriminating. And I've got a great story about Doc Stature. So this came from his nephew, who I think is writing a book. And he told me, and you would have more about this in the book when he writes it, but basically he said, like he was at, it might have been the Beverly Wilshire, another hotel. His uncle Doc is in the pool. There's two FBI agents like standing up on the balcony, wearing suits and everything, and like just sweltering in the heat. And he says, "Hey, why don't you come down here and get in the pool? You're not going to hear anything up there." So he was aware that this was going on. They were aware. So the FBI field office in Vegas creates a shell company called the Henderson Novelty Company. So if any of you ever want to go into like spy stuff, you got to give it a name like that. The Henderson Novelty Company to rent phone lines that they use to tap and bug phones. So in February of 1963, they bug Carl Cohen's apartment at the Sands. He lived at the Sands. And they get nothing useful. I went through all of it. You know, one time they got him and his wife complaining about the steak being too tough and sending it back to room service. They had like his wife talking about all her physical ailments and oh my teeth and this and my back is hurting. They really didn't get anything useful because again, these were not stupid people, and they knew that they were under target. April 28, 1963, Ed Levinson, who was the president of the Fremont, discovers a tap in his office phone. And June 25th, Carl Rove discovers that his room has been tapped. He sues the phone company. And here's where things get interesting. So he has this ironclad case. Harry Claiborne is his attorney. Harry Claiborne was the Oscar Goodman before Oscar Goodman. So in the 60s, if you were connected with organized crime, allegedly, you probably want to have Harry Claiborne as your lawyer. He was very good. You know, just as an example, when Jake Friedman applied for his gaming license, or his tax commission license back then, his attorney was Harry Claiborne. Previous guy, Kupferman, had a very well-respected local attorney. Had been a railroad guy, railroad attorney, didn't get it. Claiborne gets it. So Claiborne's his attorney, like, we're gonna sue them, and he says, we didn't know if we embarrassed the FBI. And coincidentally, I think some other charges against him were dropped, so it seems like a deal was made. Levinson sues the FBI, and it kind of fizzles out in '68. So that was a big deal. So another thing, so Sinatra. Again, Sinatra was good friends with JFK, introduced him to Judith Campbell. Bobby Kennedy is like, dude, you can't be hanging out, you know, Jack, you can't hang out with this guy, he's best friends with Sam Giancana. Okay, 1963, he is hosting Sam Giancana at the Calamada Lodge, which Sinatra owned, in Lake Tahoe. Sam Giancana was in the first edition of the Black Book. 11 people, they said, you can't let this person in your casino at all. And he's partying with him, and there was a fight in the room, and it was a whole thing. There was a whole thing, right? And it's interesting because they find out about it because this small little casino, Giancana comes in and wins a lot of money. Phyllis McGuire's with them, and she was a celebrity, was a celebrity then, very well recognized. And they recognized her and they served him, but then they figured out it was him later. It's kind of interesting. So that casino wasn't sued by the Gaming Control Board because like, well, they didn't know. Giancana is. There's a whole back and forth. Claiborne is his lawyer. He's ready to fight. But then he said, I will surrender my license to focus on my interests elsewhere. And he leases the Calamada, sells it, and sells the Sands interest immediately. So he's out of the Sands owner. All right. Howard and Neal. Okay. So the Sands just keeps on adding rooms. It's so successful. There we go. Howard and Beyond. All right, cool. Aqueduct, that was the most luxurious. That was where Adnan Khashoggi stayed. 1965, they built that tower, the cylindrical tower, the famous one. And this, for the rest of the time of the casino, the next 30 years, becomes the visual. Okay, the hotel now has almost 800 rooms. And there's a picture of it with the tower. You can see it kind of expanded greatly from those early days. Okay. So Howard Hughes, and we're all probably familiar with this story, at least somewhat, moves to Vegas Thanksgiving weekend 1966 and starts buying casinos in '67, and he buys, in July, he buys the Sands for $15 million, which is not a lot of money. I think that would renovate like 100 rooms there. He brings in Ed Nigro, who was a retired Air Force general, as a general manager, and Trotter and Cohen stay. They get kicked up to vice presidential jobs and kind of they're a step removed from day-to-day operations. Bob Mayhew runs Hughes, Nevada until 1970. Then there's a power struggle with Hughes. Hughes leaves Vegas, other people take over. And when Hughes took over, when his people took over, they improved the procedures, which meant more documentation, which meant that the people who'd been coming here who didn't like to share their names, many of them went to Caesar's Palace. So, Sinatra and Hughes had hated each other for years. Hughes said that Sinatra was a communist. Also, they were supposedly rivals for Ava Gardner. So Hughes and Sinatra did not like each other. Later in 1967, Sinatra refuses to perform. I'm sorry, I can't play. He's booked, I can't play. Sammy Davis Jr. comes up, saves the day. They fly him up from LA, and I think the show's maybe 45 minutes late. But man, Sammy. He comes back to sing that weekend, he calms down. So, I'm going to set the stage. There are 6 Apollo astronauts in the crowd. And I talk about this in my book about the Sam. So I'm kind of telling you some of the best parts here. After the show, hey guys, let's go out to the casino, let's do some gambling. He comes down and says, okay, hey, give me $15,000 credit. No, Frank, I'm sorry. You have, we've got the accountants here now. We can't give you more credit. You haven't paid your credit. Wow. Now, in front of the Apollo astronauts, he looks like he is the word I'm thinking of is mild profanity, so I'm not going to use it. But basically, he looks like a loser. And we know his personality, so he doesn't take this well. And I just picture the Apollo guys, like, yeah, we got a pretty early morning tomorrow. We'll go back to the moon. He has a fit. Okay. They go to bed. Frank freaks out. And there's some reports that he deliberately, so he's with Mia Farrow, who he was married to then. When he decides to go back to his room, some people say deliberately ran it into the plate glass window. Other people say, and it's more realistic, that he was just so frustrated he didn't put it in the right gear and he crashed into the window. And my favorite detail is by the time he's doing this, it's early in the morning and he has a shoebox on his head to shield the sun. So imagine Frank Sinatra with a shoebox on his head. All right, so he flies back to Palm Springs. Davis performs again. He comes back on Sunday. And initially he's going to apologize, right? So oh my God, I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry. And around, I think it's about 6:45 that morning, he confronts Carl Cohen in the garden room. Okay. And he is like, Carl Cohen, hey, look, we can't do this, sorry. He flips the table, and according to accounts that I've heard, Carl Cohen was scalded by hot coffee, and just instinctively, boom, throws a right hook, connects with Sinatra. Okay, now, I have heard many versions of this, one in which Sinatra had all of his teeth knocked out of his mouth, which no human punch could do that. You would need like a machine press, and he would never sing again. In actuality, 2 of his caps got loosened. He had 2 caps on his itself. But to tell you about the media and their relationship with Frank Sinatra, Don DiGilio, who was a local columnist who had had his own feud with Sinatra months before, this is the lead of his story. And I love this so much for Dave. Singer Tony Bennett left his heart in San Francisco, and Frank Sinatra left his teeth, at least 2 of them, in Las Vegas. Oh my God. They did not like it. All right, and Cohen, and this became national news. There's a clipping at the UNLV Special Collections and Archives of a newspaper in Vermont having this story. It was wild. And people were sending flowers, people were going. So that happens. And ironically, so Cohen, this is like my take on the whole thing. So Cohen is known as being such a controlled personality, could handle any irate patron, could handle any drunk. He's not remembered for that. His obituary led with punching Frank Sinatra. So it shows how 1 second of letting your guard down changes your legacy forever. Okay. 1968, Hughes announces he's going to build the new Sands of 4,000 rooms. He's going to have a mall. He's going to have something that sounds a lot like Topgolf. He had a lot of ideas, and it was a handwritten memo he gave to the press. Very unique individual. Doesn't happen. Mario Puzo researches The Godfather while playing roulette there. Puzo, who was the children of Italian immigrants, had no personal experience with mafia whatsoever. He loved playing roulette though, so he got a lot of stories at at the Sands, including, so allegedly, the person who said, I made him an offer he couldn't refuse is Carl Cohen. I believe he said that about an encounter we had with David Jansen of The Fugitive fame. But that was where that came from. Jack and Crowder dies in 71, Freeman dies in 72, Cohen leaves for the MGM Grand in 73, so they are new there. So most of the 70s, a guy named Richard Daniels was a GM, Harry Goodhart was a casino boss. People say great things about them. They were running the casino very well. And Goodhart was one of the first casino bosses to use computers to manage customers. And basically, he used it as a electronic filing system. So they didn't like track player spending, but they would have like, oh, you know, Mr. G, yeah, we've got that, you know, Johnny Walker on ice waiting for you, and how's your wife Betty, and you know, how's your Great Dane, you know, so all that information they had. So when Goodhart met him, you know, they shifted to the mass market. They started offering Keno. Adnan Khashoggi, here we go. Biggest high roller of the 70s, and it's not even close. Okay, Saudi Arabian businessman, also known as a arms dealer, with 12 homes, a private jet described as a flying Vegas discotheque, and a $70 million yacht. So this is a gentleman who can afford to lose a lot of money. He lost $500,000 in his first day at the Sands. In 74, there was actually rumors he was going to buy the casino. They reserved the entire Aqueduct building for him. That's it. Okay, so selling the Sands, and this was a big deal, selling the Sands. Well, there we go. Oh, it is shy. Come on. All right. So in 1980, Sumo, which was the successor to Howard Hughes' personal patrol, announced sale of Sands to the Pratt brothers, who owned Holiday Inns in the U.S. and Central America and Korea. Oh, man. So the Pratts planned to build a second tower and add a lot on, $50 million worth. Neil Smith was hired as a GM. He was an accountant. They hired him to Caesars. He had a lot of experience. The Pratts also bought the Brighton in Atlantic City and renamed it the Sands. And they closed the sale May of 1981. The new tower doesn't happen. They spent $15 million just to spruce the place up. They have a party called Encore 82 in early 1982 to relaunch the Sands. The Copa is closed in 1981 in June. They basically redesign it to feature daytime lounge acts and the celebrity room, the celebrity ballrooms where they have headliners. The review fails. They then relaunch the Copa for headliners in March 82. Khashoggi, so the new owners said, again, Khashoggi was losing a lot of money there, was keeping the casino afloat. He said, yeah, I'll pay my marker, but I want 30% discount. They said, no, we won't do it. So he left, he went to Caesars. So that really hurt the bottom line. Because again, that was like $10, $15 million a year just for that. Okay, so there's the Sands, putting in the new marquee and getting rid of the old one. Okay, the Pratts had forecast that Latin America would be an incredibly wealthy part of the world, and there would be a lot of Latin American travelers coming to Vegas. There was then a global recession. The Mexican government devalued the peso twice, so there are no more Mexican high rollers coming up. They started laying people off in September 82. 1983, Sumo, which still owned casinos, said, we will not cash Sands paychecks anymore. Casinos in the Strip used to cash paychecks. They said, we won't do that anymore. April 5th, they took over the Sands again. Basically, the Pratts walked away from it. Supposedly, Governor Bryan says, look, if you don't take this over again, this place is going to close. And, you know, you do have several gaming licenses in this state, so do the right thing. He did. Phil Griffith becomes president. He splits time between Vegas and Reno. He leaves, and Pat Cruisin takes over. Reagan. So Reagan stayed at the Sands October 28, 1982, in Jack and Trotter's old suite. And he wrote about it in his presidential diary. Also stayed there in his 73rd birthday, which is kind of a funny story. They had baked this 700-pound cake for him. That morning, he spent the afternoon in his hometown and like went to his childhood home, went to his high school, and had a big celebration there. And then his diary just says, oh yeah, went to the Sands, they had cake. So totally made no impression. A lot of security. Nancy Reagan also stayed there. And there was a picture of Ron, Nancy, and Wayne Newton, which is the most Vegas picture I could find. Him where he wasn't on stage at the last one. Kirk Kerkorian sells the MGM Grand in Reno and Vegas in '86. Tries to buy the Dunes in '87. Sheldon Adelson also tries to buy it then. Masao Nangaku buys it, and then Steve Wynn later buys it from Nangaku. Paid $167 million for the Sands and Desert Inn in February of 1988. Turns around and sells, so the casino becomes the MGM Sands. Then sells it in April to Sheldon Adelson. Okay, Adelson died. So Adelson's company is called the Interface Company. They started a little convention called Comdex in 1979. It became a huge convention. He actually built the West Hall of the Vegas Convention Center and donated to them basically for $1 to host Comdex. And a lot of people in Vegas, including Michael Gaughan, who owns this casino, when Adelson bought the Sands, he said now he will see how terrible the conventions are for Vegas because they drive away the gamblers. So a lot of people didn't like it. And builds the Sands Expo Center, expands it. Oh yeah, so I've been going nuts here, not even knowing it. So a lot of people disliked it. Adelson showed they were profitable, basically. November 1990, he builds the Sands Expo Center, adds all this convention space. Comdex now has 110,000 people coming to it, expands it. Thought about selling it to the LBCVA, but then decides to keep it because it's making so much money, buys out his other partners, Interface sells Comdex. He has $600 million, hires Bill Widener, Brad Stone, and Robert Goldstein from Atlantic City to develop a plan. And they say, hey, we've got a great location, we're near Mirage and Treasure Island. Originally, they were gonna build 3,000 rooms and then replace the current hotel. Then they decided, we can't really compete with that, let's just start from scratch. May 1996, they announced the closure. They're gonna build the Venetian there. Sands Expo will stay, closes June 30th. Last performers were Viva Las Vegas Afternoon Show and comedian John Pinette. Bob Stupak made the last role. Stupak was a bit of a historian and very dynamic, like probably the most interesting person I ever interviewed. I'll say that. Yeah, really. So he made the last craps roll there, and they had liquidation, so there was a lot of memorabilia. And that is the end of the Sands. Okay. That's the end. It was in Con Air, basically the plane, it's a famous scene, the plane crashes. And if you follow the movie, they're flying down Fremont Street, now they're flying south.
Exactly.
Now they're going this way, now they're going down Fremont. But, so the famous scene, it crashes into the Sands. They had built this reflecting pool just for the movie, it wasn't really there. And like the tip of the nose hits the slot machine and there's a jackpot. Right? So that's kind of fun. And they implode the tower that November. And they clear the rest. The legacy of the Sands, basically entertainment and personalities really did build Vegas. Hughes years show how they adjusted to new owners with new systems like computers. Adelson show how then Vegas changed again with conventions and stuff. Okay. But everybody, when you talk about the Sands, they don't talk about Comdex, they talk about the left. Shows how important the art is. So I think we have a couple of minutes to thank you all. Do we have 10 minutes for questions? Yes.
When did the Sands desegregate?
Right away. So this is really interesting. So in 1957, there was a story about Carl Cohen chiding Sammy Davis Jr. for spending too much time in the casino floor. And it said, like, get back in the showroom and do your thing there, okay? Which is fascinating to me because basically, this was a story that was written by Al Freeman and given to the newspapers, and then published. That story says, in 1957, we have a black man on the floor of the casino in the Sands, which is interesting. That being said, if like, you know, average, you know, John Q. Public comes up there and tries again, probably not gonna get in. But it was a bit permeable. The full desegregation happened in March of 1960 with the Moulin Rouge Agreement, where they were there. But they were kind of in the forefront in some ways, and it was also kind of permeable. So like when Billy Eckstein stayed, he could play, but there's a funny thing where he's saying, well, I need my accompanist to stay there too. No, he can't, no, he can't, no, I'm not gonna play if he doesn't. Fine, we'll let him stay, and he showed up, and the piano player was actually white. The Eckstein was just kind of making a point there, you know, prejudice and stuff. So yeah, so that happens pretty early on. And generally in Nevada gaming, like in 1968, the Gaming Control Board is still doing spot checks of desegregation around the state. So that's still an issue later in the decade. But in Vegas and the Sands, it's pretty much right away, it goes away. Yeah.
I had heard that Sammy Davis couldn't use the front entrance and had to use the employee entrance.
I believe that. And another kind of telling thing, so if you watch the movie Ocean's 11, so like most people, so Dean Martin's playing a lounge singer, most of the people in Ocean's 11 are in the casino to rob the casino. What was Sammy Davis doing? Trash.
Yeah.
Because it wouldn't be plausible that he'd be walking in the casino in the Strip in early 1960. By the time it's released, it would be. But it's very interesting, so yeah. That tracks, yes.
Did Joey Bishop write all the scripts for all of their entertainment? Did you write that?
I don't know if he wrote them all, but he did have a pretty big role. But he did a big role. I don't know if
They're actual scripts. Basically.
Yeah, and if you listen to the recordings, you'll hear the same pattern kind of recycled, yeah. So a lot of it was scripted. A lot of Feldman improvised, yeah.
This is random. I
Yeah.
remember my grandmother talking about Meyer Lance.
Yes.
Tell me about
So Meyer Lansky was one of those folks who rose up during Prohibition, figured out, let's make some money, invested in a lot of casinos around the world, in the Caribbean, in the United States. Has anyone seen The Godfather 2?
Yes.
Hyman Roth is Meyer Lansky.
it.
So basically it was the hidden investor, was very involved with the Sands, involved with a lot of other casinos. In 1954, there was an investigation that found he was a hidden owner of the Thunderbird Casino, along with the Lieutenant Governor, Clifford Jones, which caused a bit of a scandal, which led to the formation of the Gaming Control Board. From then, it was like, hey, we're not going to investigate the people. You know, as long as the people who are on the license are real people, we're not going to look where they're getting their money. We do need to know that they're real people, which is why you have Frank Sinatra and Dean Martin on paper owning shares in casinos. Whether they actually did or didn't, who can tell these days. Yes?
I suppose I got a postcard of the Thunderbird that showed there's a black Cadillac parked by the front door, and I was told that it was Meyer Lansky's son.
It's very possible.
When he worked with.
Yeah, his brother Jake was also there too. So it could have been one or the other. But yeah, they did have that, there was that involvement. There was a lot more of it. Lansky, of course, was also involved with Flamingo. Very deeply
Where
involved.
was he from originally?
Lansky was
Up north.
Lower East Side of Manhattan.
Israel.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he was from New York. You know, his family was from Poland. Let's not Poland. Grew up in New York. Went down to Miami, and you know, it's interesting in the 50s and 60s when somebody's described as Miami hotel man, whatever, that means that they were a front for Meyer Lansky. So, yeah.
Several years ago, I did a presentation called Pirates of the Caribbean. I talked about Lansky's operatives, Cliff Jones and Kozlov, opening up all the casinos, all the countries to have gambling.
Yeah, Jay Kozlov, and that, and of course Cuba was a big part of that.
Right. And the question about where is he from?
Yeah.
Lower East Side of Manhattan, his childhood friends and fellow gang members were Bugsy Siegel, and
Lucky
Charlie
Luciano.
Lucky Luciano.
Yeah. And Frank Costello's in the mix here. I mean, you know, when people are making money, everybody's different. Yeah, he's a fascinating guy. Yeah.
Wasn't Wilbur Park originally set up in Miami before he came here?
Wilbur Clark had he had owned he had owned a cocktail lounge in San Diego and had been like all over. So yeah, he was well known for his gambling activities all over. You know, but in his own name, and owned a lounge in San Diego. I think right before he came up here. Which is great. If you ever want to have fun, you know, look at the key fob, look at his testimony in front of the key fob committee, because he just doesn't know anything. How much money? My favorite exchange is like, who's the president? You know, they say that I am. Are you? I don't know. What do you do? I don't know what I did. Yeah. Yes.
Just in terms of operating the money as it flows in and out of the casino, there are always stories about skimming going on. And, you know, you get skimming stories regarding casinos.
Yeah, I mean, because you have different interests in the Sands, I get the feeling that there is money, that you have different people in there looking out after different interests and stealing money for different people. So there's a lot of that going on. And sometimes that might have spilled over into altercations with different factions. They did a good job of maintaining a public face of it. I think that's all we have time for. You